Juovau kau työnnäi, häi työnter kau työnnäi, tan mot kau työndyk dien raa ör pehan lan, vat häitee tuonbo iutootron kau työnjyten janvat, boikarn, saahoi va vanhua. Bankaak iutoo, ör pehanen lan kuter, ma noidun koot loi hongdök taidoi, bang tieng pehanen lan tjurn, daidur, va dung ching tar ngy fap. Jynguen daidur noidung, hong tom tat, hong lyök bor, kong tem tongtin moi. Chir jik dungia, va jynguen kou truk kou, örmuktoida. She dropped the chart on the floor, apologized to a wall, and spilled saline down her own scrubs. And every doctor on that floor laughed. They had no idea she'd once kept a man alive with 2 fingers pressed into his carotid artery for 40 minutes in the back of a burning vehicle, 30 outside a war zone. They had no idea the trembling hands they mocked could reconstruct a shattered trachea in under 90 seconds. They had no idea that the clumsy, quiet nurse they called the mistaken Scrubs had a classified file so deep in the Defense Department that even generals needed clearance to read her name. Tonight they would find out. And by the time those black helicopters touched down on the roof, rotors screaming through the fog, armed men pouring through every door, the doctors who laughed the loudest would be the ones begging her to save them. If this story already has you gripping your seat, follow along and don't move. Hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Let's go. The fog came in off the water early that Tuesday, the kind that swallowed the parking lot and turned the street lights into blurry orange smears. Harwick Memorial Hospital sat at the edge of Caldwell Bay like it always had. 8 stories of pale concrete and buzzing fluorescent lights, 3 emergency bays, 1 rooftop helipad, and a reputation for being the best trauma center within a 8 miles of the coast. It was also, by most internal accounts, one of the most politically vicious hospitals in the state of Marlo. Emily Tran arrived at 6:47 AMI, 13 minutes before her shift, with a travel mug of lukewarm coffee and a canvas tote bag that was fraying at one strap. She wore her dark hair pulled back tight, her scrubs 1 size too large, and her badge clipped at a slight angle she never bothered to straighten. She kept her eyes low when she moved through the lobby. She said good morning to the security desk and to the night shift aide pushing the linen cart, and she took the stairs instead of the elevator because the elevator made her feel trapped in a way she couldn't explain to anyone in this building. She'd been at Harwick for 14 months. In that time, she had learned where every supply cabinet was stocked, which attending physicians ran late, which charged nurses were running on colmy hours of sleep, and exactly how long it took to walk from the ambulance bay to the trauma suites at each pace, casual, fast, and sprint. She had not made a single close friend. That was by design. The 3rd floor nurses' station was already busy when she clocked in. Donna Marsh, the charged nurse on days, was on the phone and barely glanced up. 2 younger nurses, Priya and a new hire named Jules, were comparing notes on a patient in room 14. Emily took her assignment board, scanned it, and was already reading the first chart when she heard the voice she'd spent 14 months learning to tune out. Oh, wonderful. Carter's here. She didn't correct him on the name. She tried once call me weeks in, and decided the energy wasn't worth spending. Doctor. Nolan Voss was 39 years old, chief of surgical services, and had the particular confidence of a man who had never once been seriously wrong about anything in his own mind. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a yaw that photographs well, and a voice that filled every room he entered. The residents orbited him like small moons, nervous, attentive, laughing at everything. He had a habit of clicking his pen when he was about to say something he found clever. Click. Tell me, he said, dropping a folder on the counter beside her. Did we fix the dosage error in bed 7, or did Carter manage to make that worse too? The dosage was corrected at 11. 15 last night, Emily said without looking up. I left a note in the chart. There was no note. 3rd page after the medication log. A pause. Priya very carefully found something to look at on the other side of the station. Fine, boss said. Just double-check your documentation before you leave things for other people to clean up. He walked away, clicking his pen. Donna, who had hung up the phone in time to catch the last 30 seconds of this, looked at Emily. "You doing okay?" "Fine," Emily said. Donna gave her a look that meant she didn't believe that. But she also had 17 patients, 2 call-outs, and a pharmaceutical delivery dispute to manage, so she let it go. Emily went back to the chart. The morning moved the way most Tuesday mornings moved, fast and ugly and just barely under control. A forked car accident off the interstate brought in 3 patients before 8:00. A toddler with a suspected fracture. A construction worker with chest trauma. An elderly woman with a head laceration who kept insisting she was fine and needed to call her sister. Emily worked without pausing. She triaged. She medicated, she assisted, she documented. She was quiet and efficient. And she moved in straight lines through the chaos, which was something the newer staff found slightly odd without being able to name why. Most people under pressure got louder. Emily got quieter, not slower. Quieter, like the noise moved around her instead of through her. She was in the supply room grabbing a fresh IV kit when the chest trauma patient, the construction worker bed for named graves, on the intake form suddenly coded. She heard the alarm before anyone called it. She was already moving. By the time the crash cart rounded the corner, Emily had 2 fingers at his neck, was reading his collar, and had already identified that the defibrillator was going to be useless because this wasn't a shockable rhythm, VIB. One of the residents called pulseless electrical activity, Emily said. She didn't say it loudly, just said it. Start compressions. Do not shock him. Clears throat. The resident, young second-year name tag reading Dr. Callaway, looked at her for exactly 1 second. Something about her tone made him start compressions without arguing. Dr. Voss appeared at the door 40 seconds later, took in the scene, and immediately began directing. He called for the defibrillator. We've ruled out VIB, Callaway said, still doing compressions. Voss looked at him. Who ruled it out? She did. Callaway nodded toward Emily, who was already drawing up epinephrine. Voss looked at Emily. There was a flicker of something. Not concern, not curiosity, more like irritation at having his entrance into a room undercut. We don't know it's P without his capnography is flat. Pressure was 52 over nothing when he came in. And the rhythm on that monitor is organized. But there's no pulse. Emily said, It's PA. We need to find the cause. She said it calmly, not defensively. Just lied it out like she was reading a weather report. Was paused. Just barely. Fine. Continue. They worked for 7 minutes. Emily identified a suspected tension pneumothorax. She'd noticed the tracheal deviation before anyone else had. And when the needle decompression confirmed it, the room pressure shifted. The man's rhythm stabilized. His pressure climbed. When it was over, Voss said nothing to Emily. He told Callaway, "Good catch on the needle decompression," and left. Callaway looked at Emily. She was already pulling off her gloves. "That was you," he said. "All of that was you." "Document the intervention accurately," she said. "That's what matters." She walked out. What? Lunch was 22 minutes taken standing at the counter in the break room because she'd missed the window where a chair was available. She ate a sandwich she'd brought from home. Turkey. No condiments. Not because she didn't like condiments, but because she'd been out of everything except mustard and hadn't had time to shop and scrolled through nothing on her phone while her brain did what it always did when she stopped moving. It ran diagnostics 14 months. She'd gone longer before. She'd gone 2 years in one stretch in a city she won't name even in her own head. But Harvik was getting harder. Not because of Voss. Voss was noisy. Voss was manageable. Voss was the kind of man she'd stopped fearing in her mid-20s. What was getting harder was the work itself. She was good at pretending to be less than she was. She'd practiced it, refined it, built it into muscle memory the way you build any skill, repetition, feedback, adjustment. But pretending to be mediocre in a medical environment had a ceiling because people's lives were the cost of her act. And there were moments like this morning, Like the 3 other times in the past 14 months, she didn't let herself think about in sequence where the act had to drop just for a second, just long enough to keep someone alive. And every time she did that, she saw someone notice. Calloway had noticed today. He had the face of someone who would remember it. She finished the sandwich, washed her hands, and went back to the floor. The afternoon brought its own momentum. Around 2:30, a woman came in through the main entrance instead of the ambulance bay, walked in on her own, which wasn't unusual, except that she was supporting a teenage boy who was gray in the face and barely keeping his feet under him. Emily saw them from across the lobby and was already calculating before she'd crossed half the distance. The boy's name was Marcus. He was 16. He'd told his mother he'd just eaten something bad. But Emily could see from the way he was sweating, cold, clammy, the wrong kind of pale, that his blood pressure was headed somewhere dangerous. She got him into a bay inside 4 minutes, discovered he'd been hiding a slow GI bleed for at least 2 days, probably from NSAID overuse for a sports injury he also hadn't mentioned to anyone. When the attending on that side of the floor, Dr. Reyes, came in to take over, Emily gave a complete structured handoff, assessment, vitals, trend, suspected diagnosis, recommended intervention in 45 seconds. Reyes, who was competent and not interested in hospital politics, said, "Good catch. Who triaged him?" "I did." Reyes nodded and got to work. On her way back to the nurse's station, Emily passed Voss in the hallway. He was on his phone and barely registered her. But as she stepped past, he said without looking up, "Try not to overstep again, Carter. We have physicians here for a reason." She almost said something. She could feel the shape of the words in her mouth. The kind of thing she would have said once when she was someone who said things like that, when she was someone who could afford to. Instead, she said understood and kept walking. He arrived at 4:18 p.m. and he almost died in the parking lot. Emily was doing a medication check at the station when she heard tires. Not the controlled deceleration of an ambulance, but the abrupt wrong stop of a civilian vehicle braking too hard. She looked up through the window. A dark gray pickup truck. Driver's side door opened almost before the vehicle stopped moving. A man climbed out. No, fell out. Caught himself on the doorframe. Mid-50s, she'd estimate. Barrel-chested. He was wearing civilian clothes, but wearing them wrong. The way people do when they've spent a long time in a different kind of uniform. She was through the ambulance bay door before the intake desk had processed what was happening. "Sir." She reached him as his knees buckled. She caught his weight. He was heavy, 210 at least. And her joints registered the load without giving out. "I've got you. Don't try to stand. Just lean." I'm fine," he said. His voice was wrong. Thick, slightly delayed. "I just need to sit down." "What's the pain level?" 7, maybe 8. He reconsidered. 8. Where? Chest. Left side. "Started in my arm about an hour ago." He looked at her. "I thought it was a muscle thing." She had a wheelchair at his back in 30 seconds. Was wheeling him through the bay doors in 40. She called the code herself. She didn't wait for the desk. Didn't wait for an attending. Just called it clear. And loud while she moved him. Because the 30 seconds spent waiting would cost more than the 30 seconds spent calling. His name was Warren Delgado. The EKG she helped run confirmed a STEMI, a major heart attack, left anterior descending artery, textbook presentation, except for the fact that he'd been ambulatory right up until the parking lot. The cath lab team was paged. Voss materialized again, as he always did during anything that drew attention, and began directing the room. At one point, Warren's pressure dropped. The monitor alarmed. The room ticked up a degree of panic, not from Emily, but from the edges of the room, from the residents and the tech near the door. Emily was already adjusting. She'd been watching his pressure trend for the last 4 minutes, and she had the intervention ready before the number on the screen confirmed what she already knew. What she did next was not complicated. if you'd done it a sata times in a field hospital with intermittent power and no backup. Under normal civilian hospital conditions, it looked like something between remarkable and impossible. Voss watched. He didn't stop her. He also didn't help. He watched with his arms crossed and his pen in his hand, not clicking for once. And when Warren's pressure climbed back and stabilized, he said, "To the room, not to Emily. Get him upstairs." Warren was going to make it. Emily knew that before they wheeled him out. She knew it the way you know it, when the numbers start cooperating and the body stops fighting the help. As they moved him toward the elevator, Warren turned his head and found her eyes. "You," he said. His voice was steadier now. "What's your name?" "Ailey. You're going to be okay. You knew exactly what to do." "Cardiac protocol. Any nurse on this floor?" "No." His eyes were clear despite the medication. "Not like that." She looked away. "Rest. You need rest." The elevator doors closed. She replayed it afterward the way she always did, standing in the supply room with the lights off, which was the only place on this floor with no cameras in the corners. Not because she needed to hide, just because she needed 30 seconds where no one could watch her expression while she thought. She'd been too fast, too precise. Calloway had already noticed this morning. And now there were a room full of people who'd seen the afternoon, and Warren Delgado was alive and conscious, and had looked at her like he recognized something she'd worked very hard to bury. She needed to be more careful. She turned the lights on, straightened her badge, and went back to the floor. Voss found her at 45, which was 15 minutes before her shift ended, which meant he'd timed it. "My office," he said. It wasn't a question, but she also knew it wasn't something she could refuse without escalating it further than she wanted to right now. She followed him down the corridor, past the charge desk where Donna was doing end-of-shift reconciliation, and watched them go without saying anything. Voss closed the door, sat behind his desk, did not offer her a chair, which she noted, and filed away as deliberate. "I want to talk about what happened today," he said. "Which part?" "All of it. Graves this morning, the kid at 2:30, Delgado this afternoon." He looked at her. "That's 3 interventions in one shift where you acted ahead of attending physicians. In each case, the patient needed immediate intervention and the attending wasn't immediately available. That's not how this hospital functions." "I understand. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you've been doing this for a while. Small things I can overlook. Today wasn't small." He leaned back. "I've been reading your employment file. Your background is," he paused, searching for the word he wanted. "Limited community college program. Regional hospital. A cagier gap that's vague at best. And yet you function like someone with 20 years of trauma experience." He held her gaze. "Who are you actually?" The question sat in the air between them. She'd rehearsed answers for this. She had 3 different ones calibrated for 3 different versions of this conversation. She selected the appropriate one, delivered it with the appropriate amount of hesitation, not too much, not too little, and watched him decide whether he believed it. He didn't believe it. She could see that, but he also couldn't prove it. And the hospital's legal exposure on wrongful action was significant enough that he'd need more than suspicion. "I'm going to be watching you," he said. "One more incident where you overstep your scope, and I'll go to Hale. Dr. Marcus Hale was the chief medical officer of Harwick Memorial. She'd had exactly 6 conversations with him in 14 months. Brief, administrative, nothing personal. He was the kind of man who paid close attention to things people didn't intend him to see. She'd been careful around him specifically. "I understand," she said again. "Good." He picked up his pen. Click. "That's all." She left. In the hallway outside, she let out a slow breath through her nose. Donna was walking toward her from the nurse's station. "You okay?" Donna said. "He wants me to be less competent," Emily said. Donna looked at her for a moment. "What did you actually say?" "I said I understood." Donna made the face she made when she was calculating whether to push further. "Be careful with him. He's the kind of man who makes calls." "I know, and Emily." She lowered her voice slightly. Whatever you're hiding, I don't need to know, but you should think about whether this is the right place to hide it. Emily looked at her. Donna was 53, had worked this floor for 19 years, and missed very little. I'll think about it, Emily said. She took the stairs again on the way out. Brushed. The evening shift had thinned the parking lot to scattered vehicles when she reached her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine. The fog had come back thicker now, rolling in from the water and grey sheets that blurred the lights of the hospital behind her. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it. It buzzed again. She picked up. Silence on the other end for calmy seconds. Then a voice she hadn't heard in 6 years. Calm. Flat. The kind of voice trained specifically to carry information without inflection. We have a problem. She closed her eyes. You have the wrong number. Tran. A pause. Emily. We have a very significant problem, and there are exactly 2 people in the world who can fix it. One of them is currently unreachable. She knew what came after that sentence. She'd always known this call would come. She'd built 14 months of careful, quiet, invisible life on the assumption that she had more time before it did. I'm a nurse, she said. I work at a hospital. I don't. The convoy is already moving. It's heading toward Caldwell Bay. Her hand tightened on the phone. How far out? She said her voice was different now. She couldn't quite stop it from being different. 4 hours, maybe 3. Another pause. They hit them outside Dresner. 7 down, more wounded. Director Alves is in the vehicle. Emily, she's in the vehicle. The fog outside the windshield seemed to thicken. Which hospital? She said. A beat of silence that told her everything before he answered. Harwick Memorial, he said. She sat completely still for 4 seconds. Then she started the car. She drove back into the parking lot with the engine still running and sat there for exactly 90 seconds, which was how long it took her to run the math, and accept that the math wasn't going to change no matter how long she sat there. Call me hours, maybe 4. A convoy, carrying a critically wounded intelligence director, moving through the dark toward the only level 1 trauma center within range of where they'd been hit, which was this one, which was Harwick Memorial, which was where Emily Tran had spent 14 months building a life specifically designed to keep her out of situations exactly like this one. The fog had swallowed the last of the daylight. The hospital behind her was lit up white and indifferent, the way hospitals always looked from the outside, like a building that didn't know what it cost to keep the lights on. She called the number back. He picked up on the first ring. What's her status? She said shrapnel. Significant. They're managing her in the vehicle, but it's deteriorating. They have 1 medic with them, and he's been working her for 6 hours. Who's the medic? Ortega. She exhaled. Ortega was good. Ortega was better than good. The fact that he was struggling meant the wounds were worse than the first report suggested. Who knows I'm here? She said. A pause that told her more than she wanted. Trans. Who knows? It's not a long list, he hesitated. But it's longer than you'd like. How much time do I have before they arrive? Best estimate is 2. 0 am. Possibly earlier, if they push the route. It was 6:22 p.m. She did the arithmetic. I'm going back in, she said. Emily. His voice shifted. Less operational. Something underneath it. Be careful about how you do this. If you surface completely, I know what it means. She hung up and turned off the car. The night shift charge nurse was a man named Terry Bosch, methodical, unflappable, and currently dealing with a supply discrepancy that had him on hold with the pharmacy when Emily walked back through the bay doors. She told him she'd forgotten something. He barely looked up. She went to the locker room, changed back into her scrubs, and spent 4 minutes in the bathroom with the tap running, doing what she always did when she needed to transition between the person she pretended to be and the person she actually was. The difference wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a physical transformation. It was quieter than that. A kind of internal rearrangement, like furniture, shifted Cox into the left. The same face in the mirror, the same tired eyes, but something behind them that had been sitting at a low idle for 14 months finally came off the governor. She went to find Dr. Marcus Hale. He was in his office on the 7th floor, which was both unusual for this hour and entirely consistent with what she'd come to understand about him. Hale stayed late the way some people stayed late. Not because the work demanded it, but because going home was something he'd never quite worked out how to do well. She knocked once. He looked up from his desk with the expression of a man who'd been expecting someone else. "Nurse Tran," he said. "I need these minutes," she said. "And I need them now." He looked at her for a moment. He was 60 täyksi, compact, with close-cropped grey hair and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He had the face of a man who had been lied to enough times that his default mode was something between skepticism and patience. "Sit down," he said. "I'll stand. What I need to tell you is going to sound irregular. Most things that start that way are. There is a military convoy that was ambushed approximately 4 hours ago outside of Dresdner. It's moving toward this hospital right now. It will arrive sometime around 2:00 in the morning, possibly earlier. The convoy is carrying a wounded federal official. There will be a military security detail, and there will be federal presence, and this hospital needs to be prepared before they get here." Hale took his glasses off his forehead and set them on the desk. He did not say anything for a long moment. "How do you know this?" he said. "I can't explain that in a way you'll find satisfying right now. Try. I have contacts. Former contacts. In a context I don't work in anymore. One of them reached me tonight. The information is credible. I need you to trust that. Without the context." He studied her. The reading glasses sat between them on the desk like a punctuation mark. "You're a nurse on my 3rd floor," he said. Not accusing, just stating. "Yes. And you have contacts in military intelligence. Former contacts." "Yes. Emily." He said her name carefully like he was testing its weight. "I've watched you work for over a year. I've read the incident reports, the things attributed to quick thinking, the things attributed to protocol. I've also read the things that didn't make it into reports, because the attendant who should have documented them didn't want to explain why a floor nurse solved a problem before he did." She said nothing. "Whatever you're not telling me," he said. "I'm going to need more than trust me before I start rearranging this hospital's operational structure for the night. Then I'll give you more." She took a breath. "The official in that convoy is Director Claudia Alves. She runs an intelligence division whose name you won't find in public records. She was targeted specifically. The ambush was not random, which means whoever organized it may not be done. If that convoy arrives at this hospital and the wrong people know she's here, the risk doesn't stop with the vehicle." Hale was very still. "You're telling me this hospital could become a target?" he said. "I'm telling you to prepare for that possibility." "Yes." He was quiet for 11 seconds. She counted. "What do you need?" he said. She needed 3 things, and she got all 3 within 40 minutes, which was faster than she'd expected, and spoke to something about Hale that she filed away and respected later. The first was access, not to her own floor, but to trauma bay coordination, which put her in the operational loop without requiring her to explain why. The second was a quiet conversation with hospital security about external perimeter protocols, which Hale facilitated without fanfare, framing it as a routine contingency drill update. The third was harder. She needed to talk to Terry Bosch without telling him anything she wasn't ready to say out loud in a building with thin walls and a staff that communicated at the speed of rumor. She found him at the nurses' station at 7:40. "There may be a mass casualty situation developing tonight," she said. "Low direct multiple trauma patients military adjacent. I don't have authorization to brief you fully yet, but I need you to know if I give you an instruction tonight that sounds like it's above my pay grade. There's a reason." Terry looked at her over the top of his reading glasses. He was 58 and had worked ICS and ERS and combat support hospitals. She knew the last part from a conversation they'd had once. briefly about a mutual familiarity with field conditions that neither of them had elaborated on. "How bad?" he said. "Could be significant. You want me to pull in backup staff?" Quietly. "Don't explain why. If you have staff who don't rattle easily, get them in." He nodded once. He didn't ask her how she knew. She liked him for that. She went back to the third floor, changed the dressing on a post-op patient in room 9, updated 2 charts, and checked her watch 4 times in 20 minutes without letting anyone see her do it. At 8:15, Voss reappeared. She hadn't expected him until the next morning, but he was back in the building. She could tell by the way the energy shifted on the floor, the way the residents pulled slightly straighter, and the nurses found reasons to be occupied. He had a way of making rooms aware of him before he physically entered them. He found her at the medication cart. "You're still here," he said. "Terry needed coverage." "I thought you finished at 6. Nolla. I did. I came back." He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her all day, like a puzzle he was annoyed to find interesting. "We're going to have that conversation with Hale," he said. "Not tonight, but soon. I know. I'm serious, Carter. I know you are." She turned back to the cart. "I'd appreciate it if you used my actual name." A pause. "Short, but the kind that had texture. Tran," he said with the deliberate quality of someone doing something they found mildly distasteful. And then he left. Priya, who had been pretending to chart at the adjacent station, said nothing, but Emily caught the corner of her almost smile. Mads. At 9:40 p.m., her phone buzzed again. Different number this time. A field code she hadn't seen in 2 years. Formatted exactly right, which meant whoever sent it was either someone she trusted or someone who had access to things that should not be accessible. She excused herself to the stairwell. "The route changed," the voice said. "Different person this time, familiar in a different way." They moved her to a secondary vehicle after the primary transport showed heat damage. "Eta is closer to midnight now, not 2. 2 hours earlier." "Yes. And Tran, the people who hit the convoy, they're tracking the vehicle." She closed her eyes briefly. "You're sure?" "We picked up signals out of Dresner an hour ago." "They know where the convoy is going. Do they know about this hospital specifically?" "They will." She pressed her back against the stairwell wall. The building hummed around her. Ventilation, machinery, the 1,000 quiet sounds of a hospital keeping bodies alive. "Is there backup coming?" She said already in motion, but they won't be there before the convoy arrives. "How long behind?" 30, maybe 40 minutes. 30 to 40 minutes was a long time. She knew exactly how much could happen in 30 minutes. She'd spent years learning that particular math. "All right," she said. She went to find Hale again. He was in the Trauma Bay coordinator's office when she reached him, reviewing staff positioning with a man from hospital security named Roar, who had the build and bearing of someone who had worn a different kind of uniform before this one. She noticed that, immediately, "File it 2 hours earlier," she said, "and the people who ambushed the convoy know she's coming here." Hale absorbed this without the visible flinch she might have expected. "What do you recommend?" "Lock the external access points. Not visibly, not a lockdown that triggers patient panic. Just close the routes that don't need to be open at midnight. Ambulance bay stays clear." "Everything else I can do that," Roar said. He had a quiet, careful voice for someone his size. "We run reduced access protocols at 11 anyway. I can tighten it without it reading as unusual." "Good." She turned back to Hale. "I need the 2 best trauma nurses you have available on standby in Bay 1, and I need the O-prepped but dark, ready to go, but not lit up in a way that signals activity." Hale said, "You're expecting multiple patients at minimum. The report I have suggests 7 casualties with the convoy when it was hit. Some will have been managed en route, some won't. And Director Alves, her injuries are significant. She's going to need immediate surgical intervention. The medic keeping her alive right now is good, but he's been running on borrowed time for hours." Hale looked at Roar. Something passed between them quick. The kind of look that meant they'd worked together long enough to communicate without sentences. "I'll make the calls," Hale said. She nodded. She was almost out the door when he said her name. She stopped. "What else are you not telling me?" he said. "Not hostile. Not even suspicious. Exactly. Just careful." She considered how to answer that. The honest version was long and complicated and required disclosure she wasn't in a position to make unilaterally. The short version was true enough to keep us both busy tonight. She said everything you need to know. You know she left. The next 90 minutes move the way time moves when you're waiting for something bad, simultaneously fast and unbearable. The minutes stacking up, while every small sound from outside sharpened. Emily worked. She checked the trauma base, confirmed supply levels, reviewed the chart on every active patient on the floor, and identified the two most stable who could be moved to free up room if the situation required. She talked to the nurses Hale had pulled in, a man named Decker, who had an Army Reserve patch on his personal jacket hanging in his locker, which she noticed and did not comment on. A woman named Saras, who worked surgical ECU and had a stillness about her that Emily recognized. At 10:55, Voss came back. He was walking with intention, the kind of intention that meant someone had said something to him. He went directly to Hale's office. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she didn't need to. She could read the posture through the glass panel in the door. Voss was not pleased. Hale was not explaining himself. They were very briefly at an impasse. At 11:08, Voss came out and found Emily at the nurse's station. "You went to Hale," he said. "Yes." "You told him." He stopped himself, recalibrated. "What exactly did you tell him?" "That there may be a significant incoming situation tonight, and the hospital should prepare. You're a floor nurse. You don't have the authority to. I gave him information and asked him to use his judgment. He's the CMO. Using his judgment is exactly his authority." "Based on what information? Where is this coming from?" She looked at him. He was genuinely thrown. Not just annoyed now, but uncertain, which was a different thing entirely and one she suspected he experienced rarely. "Dr. Voss," she said, "in a few hours this hospital is going to get very complicated. I'd recommend spending the time you have before then making sure your team is ready instead of managing me." He stared at her. The pen was in his hand. He did not click it. "Who are you?" he said. Low. Genuine. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she went back to work. The at 11:47 p.m. the radio crackled. It wasn't the hospital radio. It was the security channel, the one Roar monitored, and the burst of static that came through was not a normal hospital frequency. Emily was in the trauma base supply room when she heard it. She stopped moving. The sound that came through the static was a sequence. 7 digits, a pause, then 4 more. She heard it for less than colmy seconds before Roar switched channels. She walked out of the supply room and found Roar in the corridor. "That signal," she said. He looked at her. His expression did something careful and complicated. "What about it?" he said. "Not a question. It's a field coordination code, DOD adjacent specifically. And I'd like you to tell me I'm wrong about this. It's an advanced notification from a military escort unit." Roar held her gaze for a long moment. "You recognize that code?" "Yes." "From where?" She didn't answer. He didn't push. "They're closer than the last estimate," he said instead. "Security unit is signaling approximately 35 minutes out." She nodded. She turned and walked back to the trauma bay, and she said loudly enough for Decker and Saras to hear, "They're 35 minutes out. Let's go." Decker looked up from the supply cart. Saras was already moving before Emily finished the sentence. Decker was a half beat behind. Not slow, just processing. "What do we know about the primary patient?" Saras asked. "Female mid-50s, shrapnel trauma, hemodynamic status unknown, but deteriorating as of 2 hours ago. She's had a medic managing her in the vehicle. I don't know what interventions have been done. We go in assuming worst case. Blood products requested. Hale is confirming with the blood bank." Now, Airway kit bay, one top. Shelf already checked. Sarah nodded. She had a focused matter-of-fact quality under pressure that Emily found steadying in the way of someone who knew what they were there for. Voss appeared at the bay entrance. He looked at the three of them, Emily running the trauma bay. Decker and Sarah organized on either side. The space cleared and staged. Hale briefed me, he said. His voice was different, flatter. Something in him was recalibrating in real time, and to his credit, it was happening out loud instead of sideways. What do you need from me? It was the first time he'd ask her that. She almost let it go unremarked. Then she decided it was more important to answer it cleanly than to let the moment sit. Be ready to intubate on arrival if the airway's compromised, she said. And if I give you a number, move to it without the discussion. We won't have time. He absorbed that. Fine. At 12. 19 aamiiniä, the parking lot lights picked up movement. Emily was standing at the ambulance bay doors when the first vehicle came through the fog. Not an ambulance, but an armored transport, dark and fast and running with the particular economy of movement she recognized from a different life. Behind it, two more vehicles, then a black SUV, then another transport, and then she heard the helicopters. They were running low. Two of them blades cutting the fog to pieces. One breaking off toward the rooftop helipad, and one circling overhead in a holding pattern. The sound was physical, something you felt in your back teeth. The convoy stopped at the bay. The first transport door opened and a man dropped out. Body armor, no insignia she could read at this distance. A weapon at his side that he was not pointing at anything, but that he was also not pretending wasn't there. He looked at the bay. He looked at Emily. He walked toward her in long strides and stopped 3 feet away. This is Harwick, he said. Yes, we have 4 priority casualties and 1 critical. ETA on federal medical backups. He checked something at his wrist. 38 minutes. I know. We have a trauma team ready. Walk me through the critical. He looked at her. Really looked the kind of assessment she was used to from people who operated in environments where getting the read wrong cost lives. Shrapnel. At least 2 fragments in the upper left quadrant. One may be adjacent to the spleen. BP was 80/50 when we pulled the last read 20 minutes ago. She's conscious but barely verbal. Ortega's been managing her. He went very still. How do you know that name? She met his gaze. Because I know who's in that vehicle. Let's go. He stared at her for 1 more second. Then he turned and raised his arm, and the rear doors of the first transport opened. They brought her out on a stretcher that had seen real use, straps worn, surface dark in places that Emily did not look at too long. Claudia Alves was a compact woman, with grey stray hair and a jaw set hard against the pain, her left side wrapped in field dressings that had done their job, but were not going to keep doing it much longer. A man beside her, Ortega, she knew without being told, because of the way he held the IV line and the controlled desperation in how he moved, was giving rapid-fire vitals as they pushed through the bay doors. Emily was alongside the stretcher before it cleared the doorframe. What did you give her? She said. Morphine, initial dose on scene. I backed off when pressure dropped. TXA, 2 doses. I packed the lateral wound she's been holding, but it's been 30 minutes since the last pack check, and I don't okay. She put her hand on Ortega's arm briefly, not to comfort, just to anchor. I've got her. You did good. He looked at her. He was maybe 30, with the face of someone who had been holding something together through sheer will for the past several hours. Who are you? He said. She was already moving alongside the stretcher, reading Alves's collar, taking her wrist pulse, making the 37 assessments that needed to happen before they reached Bay 1. Someone who's been here before, she said. The trauma bay was exactly as she'd staged it. Decker was on the left, with the blood products ready. Saris was at the airway station watching Alves's breathing with focused attention. Voss was at the procedure tray, which he'd positioned correctly. She noted that, without remarking on it, BP, Emily said, as they transferred her to the bay table, Saras, 78/52. Too low. Push the first unit. She was at Alves's left side, her hands moving over the field dressings with careful speed, reading what was underneath them through pressure and the tension of the tissue. She's got at least one fragment still in there. The packing is holding, but it's not going to hold much longer. We should get her to O, Voss said. We will, but if we don't stabilize her pressure first, she dies on the table. She glanced at him. You know that a beat. Yes. Then let's do it in the right order. Alves opened her eyes. They found Emily's face, with the deliberate effort of someone fighting through significant pain to see clearly. Who? She started. You're at Harwick Memorial. You're safe. Don't talk. You need to let me work, Emily said. Not harsh. Just final. There will be time to talk after. Alves held her gaze for another moment. Then she closed her eyes and let it happen. The next 22 minutes were the longest Emily had spent inside a hospital room in 14 months. Not because it was beyond her. It wasn't. This was exactly what she'd been trained for. What she'd done in conditions so far from a sterile trauma bay that the comparison was almost funny. Ortega had kept Alves alive across an hours-long vehicle transport with limited supplies, and that gave Emily something to work with, but there were 3 other things happening simultaneously. The 4 other casualties from the convoy were being managed in adjacent bays. Emily kept one ear on their reports. Decker moving between them, Sarah splitting her attention. The 2 additional nurses Hale had called in working with controlled focus. The escort unit had fanned out through the hospital's ground floor. She could hear radio traffic outside the bay doors. Brief coded, but she could parse enough of it to know they were running a security sweep. And somewhere in the building, she could feel the presence of the 3rd element before she could name it. It was nothing specific, not a sound, not a visual. 14 years of operating in environments where the wrong read meant something worse than professional embarrassment had built in her, a sensitivity to the way the air changed when something was coming that shouldn't be. She was placing the 2nd. Ivy line when the escort unit commander, she'd learned his name was Reeves, appeared in the bay doorway. His face said enough. We have a problem, he said. She didn't look up from what she was doing. Tell me. 2 of our perimeter signals dropped out 60 seconds ago. External northwest corner. Her hands did not stop moving. Someone cut them or jammed them. Either way, we have people who followed the convoy. She finished the line, checked the connection, looked up. How many entrances are still secured? Roar has 3 external points locked. The northwest loading dock. That's the one without cameras, she said. Reeves looked at her with that same expression he'd had in the parking lot, recalibrating, reassessing, filing something away about her that he hadn't anticipated. Yes, he said. Seal it from the inside if you can. If you can't, pull your people back from the perimeter and defend the bay corridor. They can't get to this room without going through the main ground floor. We have 3 personnel plus Roar. Against an unknown I know. She looked at Voss, who had heard all of this. He was very still. How far out is the federal backup? Reeves checked his wrist. 22 minutes. 22 minutes. She looked at Alolves, who was unconscious now, but holding, pressure climbing incrementally, the blood products doing what they needed to do. She looked at Ortega, who had stationed himself at the head of the table, and was watching her with the focused attention of someone ready to follow a lead. She looked at the bay doors. Then she looked at Voss. He was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not contempt, not calculation. Something close to the look Calloway had given her that morning, 12 hours and a different world ago. Whatever you need, he said. She almost said something human to him. She almost said something about how the day had gone, and what she'd been holding, and the weight of performing ordinary competence in a place that kept demanding extraordinary. She almost said, I know this is not what you expected. Instead, she said, get Alves stable enough to hold for 20 minutes. Can you do that? Yes, then do it. She walked to the bay doors and pushed them open. The corridor outside was empty. The lights were on their overnight setting, dimmed but functional, the fluorescents doing their flat, relentless job. Somewhere at the far end of the hall, she could hear Reeves on the radio, low and quick. And from somewhere below her, from the direction of the northwest stairwell, which was the stairs nobody used because they came up through the loading dock and came out behind the utility corridor, she heard a sound. Not the building settling, not the ventilation system, something deliberate, something quiet, something that was trying very hard not to be heard and almost succeeding. She stood in the hallway of Harwick Memorial Hospital, 14 months of a carefully constructed ordinary life dissolving behind her, and listened to the sound of people who had come here to finish what they'd started on a road outside Dresner. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. She thought about Warren Delgado, who had looked at her in the elevator and seen something she hadn't meant to show him. She thought about Calloway, who had started compressions without asking why. She thought about Donna, who had told her to think about whether this was the right place to hide. The sound from the stairwell came again, closer now, more than one source, moving upward with the careful patience of people who intended to finish a job. And Emily Tran, who had spent 14 months, being the nurse who dropped things and stumbled over words, and let men like Voss define the ceiling of what she was allowed to be. Emily Tran took a step toward the stairwell door, and then another, and then she was moving, and she was not stumbling, and there was nothing careful or hidden or diminished about how she moved through that corridor. She reached the stairwell door. She put her hand on the handle. From behind her, down the corridor, she heard Reeves. Tran, don't. She opened the door. Two figures on the landing below, black tactical gear, faces covered, moving up with weapons raised. They froze when the door opened. A half second of recalibration. The fraction of a moment between recognition and reaction. It was enough. She moved. The first man reacted fast. Not fast enough. Emily had the door open less than a second before he brought his weapon up, and she was already inside his reach by the time the barrel cleared his body. She didn't fight the weapon. She moved with it, redirected the angle, and put her elbow into his throat with the compact economy of someone who had done this in darker places than a hospital stairwell. He went down hard against the landing rail. The second man was a step behind him, which gave her exactly the margin she needed to put her back against the wall and deny him the angle. He was bigger. He adjusted faster than the first one. He got a hand on her forearm and she let him pull, used his pull against him, rotated her weight, drove his head into the doorframe at a velocity that made a sound she didn't let herself think about. 2 seconds. Both down, not dead. Weapons secured. She was breathing harder than she wanted to admit. Reeves appeared in the doorway above her, weapon raised, taking in the stairwell with the swept, practiced look of someone doing threat assessment and finding the threat already managed. He looked at the two men on the landing. He looked at Emily. He did not say anything for a moment. There are more. She said this was a probe. 2 people you send up first to see what kind of resistance you meet. She checked the weapon she'd taken, confirmed the safety, tucked it against her body. The rest will know they didn't come back in about 90 seconds. How many more? I don't know. The signal pattern work picked up before they cut it. At least 2 separate sources. So, minimum 4 total, possibly more. She stepped past him into the corridor. We need to lock this level. Reeves was already on his radio. Roar had the northwest corridor sealed in nearly a minute, which was impressive under the circumstances. He used the hospital's internal security shutters, the ones installed after a facility upgrade 3 years ago that most of the staff had never thought about to close off the utility access points from the ground floor. It bought time, not a solution. Time. Emily went back to the trauma bay. Voss looked up when she came through the doors. He took in her face, her posture, the thing she was carrying that was not standard nursing equipment, and he did not speak for a moment. She's holding, he said. Pressure is at 89/60. The second blood unit is running. How's the lateral wound? I repacked it. There's still a fragment in there that needs the O, but she can survive the weight if we keep the pressure up. Emily moved to the table. Alves's color was slightly better. Not good, but the gray had softened. Ortega was at the head monitoring her airway with the concentration of a man who had been running on adrenaline for 6 hours and was not going to stop until he physically couldn't continue. Ortega, she said. He looked at her. You need to eat something. There are protein bars in the top left cabinet. That's an order, he blinked. She needs you functional for the next hour. Go, he went. She took his position at the head of the table and ran her own assessment. Pupils, response, airway, the mechanical inventory of a body in crisis. Alves's eyes opened. They found Emily, with the same deliberate effort as before, but clearer this time. The morphine had metabolized enough that her cognition was returning, and the first thing it brought with it was clearly not comfort. They're here, Alv said. Low. Certain. Yes. How many did you find? Emily glanced at Voss, who was watching this exchange, with the expression of a man who had systematically revised every assumption he'd built about this woman over the past 4 hours. 2 in the stairwell, Emily said, contained. There are more. Alolves closed her eyes briefly, opened them. The convoy wasn't the primary target. Emily waited. The ambush was designed to move me here to a civilian hospital because in a combat facility I have protection they can't penetrate. Alves' voice was controlled, but the effort it cost was visible in the tension around her mouth. They needed me vulnerable. They needed a place where the security perimeter was thin. Who knew your convoy route? That's what I've been working out for 6 hours. Her jaw tightened. It was a short list. How short? 4 people with full access. One of them is dead. He died at Dresner, which either means he was the leak and they cleaned him up, or he was the first casualty of someone trying to stop the leak. She stopped, took a breath. The effort of sustained speech was costing her. There's a second operation, something I have open, ongoing. If I don't check in by 400, it closes. Everyone associated with it disappears into protection protocols, and the whole thing goes dark for a year. Emily looked at the clock on the bay wall. 1, 8, a.m. less than, call me hours, she said. I need a secure line. The hospital communications are not secure. I know. Alves's eyes held hers. Do you have one? It was a specific question, not a generic ask. A specific one. The kind you only ask someone if you already have reason to believe the answer is yes. Emily held her gaze for a moment. Not here, not on me. But you could get one. Director Alves, I know who you are, but said quietly, flatly, with the simplicity of a statement that had been waiting to be made. I've known since Reeves described who met the convoy. He described how you moved, how you assessed, what you said. There are 17 people in the world who would handle that bay arrival the way you did, and I've read the file on all of them. A pause. Most of them are still active. One of them went quiet 2 years ago. A nurse in Caldwell Bay. Emily's hands were very still on the table edge. The line? She said. I'll find you a line. But you need to stay alive long enough to use it, which means you need to stop talking and let this blood product do its job. Alves almost smiled. It was a thin thing. There and gone. You haven't changed. I've changed a lot, Emily said. Be quiet, said T. She found Reeves in the corridor and pulled him 2 steps from the nearest doorway. She needs a secure channel, military-grade encrypted. Do any of your units have a portable setup? Giz does. He's on the roof. Get Caris down here. Reeves spoke into his radio. Emily was already moving toward Hale's position. He'd relocated to the security hub near the nurse's station, running the internal communications with Roar while managing the patient status flow from 3 separate bays. The federal backup, she said. Hale checked his phone. 15 minutes out, maybe 12. They've got a full team. I was told to expect FBI and Dodd. When they arrive, I need the ground floor cleared for their entry. Don't let them come through the main lobby. The northwest corner is where the breach happened. And if there are more of them already inside the building, Roar is sweeping the ground floor now. He has 2 of Reeves's people with him. All right, she looked at him. He looked back. He had the face of a man who was doing something very different from what he'd expected to be doing at Yksi, Nolla in the morning, and was handling it with the kind of steady competence that doesn't get celebrated because it rarely fails visibly. "Are you going to tell me who you are?" he said, not accusatory, genuinely asking with the tone of a man who'd accepted he'd needed the answer since at least 9, "After tonight," she said. "I'll tell you after tonight," he nodded. "Fair." She went back to the trauma bay, and she almost reached the doors. The sound that stopped her was not loud. A single bang, something heavy, metallic, the controlled violence of a forced entry from the east side of the building. Then voices on Roar's radio, too fast to parse from this distance, but the tone carried enough. They were inside. Reeves was already moving when she hit the corridor. 2 of his people came from the direction of the stairwell at a run positioning at the bay corridor junction. East service entrance. Reeves said he was not panicked. His voice had gone flatter the way trained people's voices went when the situation moved from preparation into execution. "At least 3. Roar's team has eyes on one of them. The other 2 broke off. They're going for the bay." Emily said, "We don't know. They know exactly where she is. They've known since the convoy arrived." 2 broke off because one goes for the primary target and one goes for the backup objective. She was already calculating the building geometry in her head. The east service entrance came up through the pharmacy corridor, which connected to the patient wing, which had a secondary access point to the trauma bay corridor at its far end. The secondary objective is the communications room. They want to cut our ability to coordinate before the federal team arrives. Reeves absorbed this in about 1 second. "Peterson," he said into his radio, "get to the comms room, ground floor northwest." A burst of static. Then Peterson's voice tight. "Contact east corridor." "I've got static again." Reeves looked at Emily. "How many of your people do you have functional?" She said 4, minus Peterson. 3 then. And Roar, plus whatever you are. I need one of yours on the bay door. Nobody gets in that room except Hale and the federal team. She looked down the corridor. The comms room is secondary. If they cut it, they cut it. The backup line Caris is bringing is what matters now. And the third operative, the one heading for the bay. I'll handle the approach corridor. Reeves stared at her. "By yourself." "I handled the stairwell. That was 2 people. This is 1. She checked the weapon she'd taken. 17 rounds. Standard load. More than she needed, hopefully. Position your people and get Caris moving. Clock's running." She didn't wait for his response. The trauma bay approach corridor was 60 aft long and ended in a junction left toward the main nurses' station, right toward the utility access. Emily moved down it with her back to the wall, keeping to the shadow where the overnight lighting dropped between fixtures. The building's normal sounds were still running underneath everything. Ventilation, the distant alarm of a monitor in one of the patient rooms, the structural hum of a building that didn't know it was a combat environment. She stopped at the junction, listened. Footsteps, one source coming from the right, the utility access, which meant they'd come through the service entrance and navigated to this corridor without triggering anything Roar's remaining unit had caught. Smart, methodical, she controlled her breathing. The figure came around the corner moving fast, weapon up, scanning, and she was already pivoting out from the wall. The next 8 seconds were not clean or cinematic. There was a collision, a struggle over the weapon that she won partially and lost partially. She got the gun, but took an elbow to the face that made the corridor tilt. She hit the wall, used it to push back, and the man was larger than her by 60 lb and knew how to fight. He got a hand around her wrist. She dropped the weapon deliberately, drove her knee into his lateral quad muscle. Not a finishing move, but it bought her a second, and when he compensated for it, she put the heel of her palm into his nose. He staggered. She had the weapon back. She pressed it to his throat and said low and flat, "Stop." He stopped. He was breathing hard. So was she. Her cheek felt swollen already. And she was going to have a spectacular bruise by morning, assuming she made it to morning. On the floor. she said. Hands. He went down. She zip-tied his wrists with the restraints Reeves had handed her before she'd moved. Practical, unglamorous. And then she was on her feet and moving because the clock on the wall in her head said the federal team was minutes out and there was still Alves to get to the O. She was halfway back to the trauma bay when Voss's voice came through the internal radio, sharp and stripped of everything professional. She's crashing. Bay 1, get here now. The trauma bay was organized chaos when she pushed through the doors. Voss at the table, hands working. Saras pulling a second crash cart. Decker calling vitals that were not cooperating. Alves had gone hypotensive, her pressure dropping below the threshold that the packing and the blood products had been holding back for the past 40 minutes. She's bleeding faster, Voss said. He didn't look up. The fragment must have shifted. We're losing her if she doesn't go to O right now. Can she survive the transport to the O? She can't survive staying here. Emily looked at the clock, the federal team, the O, which Hale had kept dark and ready, the corridor, which now had one operative down and potentially others she hadn't accounted for. Ortega, she said. He was back at the head of the table. Airway stays. You don't let it go for any reason. Copy. Saras, push the third unit on the move. Get the IV pump on the cart. Already on it. She looked at Voss. He was looking at her, not with the expression of a managing a nurse, with the expression of someone waiting for a call from someone who knows more than he does, which was a different thing, and which she registered as a small shift in the architecture of this night. I need you in the O, she said. I'm going to be in the quarter until the federal team arrives. If we take fire getting her there, we're moving a critical patient through a corridor that might have active. Yes. So? We move fast and we don't stop. She pulled the cart release with one hand. Ready? He wasn't ready. Nobody in that room was ready for what this night had become. But Voss grabbed the other side of the cart and said, Go. They went. The corridor was clear. Emily moved ahead, weapon in hand. Voss and Ortega pushing the cart behind her. Saras, managing the IV line, 60, FT, to the elevator. The doors were open. Hale had held them, standing at the panel with the expression of a man who had also stopped being the version of himself he'd been that morning. They got in. The doors closed. In the elevator, in the 10 seconds it took to reach the 4th floor, nobody spoke. Alves's monitor beeped. Irregular. Unhappy. Ortega kept his hands exactly where they needed to be. Voss stared at the ceiling panel above the table with the focused blankness of someone running scenarios. Emily watched the floor indicator, 34. The doors opened onto the surgical floor, and standing in the hallway in tactical gear with federal badges, visible were 6 people who had not been there 20 minutes ago. The lead figure, a woman, dark hair, wearing a jacket with DOD credentials on the chest, looked at Emily, at the weapon, at the patient on the cart, at the scene with this particular snap focus of someone who had been briefed, but was still recalibrating for what they'd actually arrived to find. Tran, the woman said. Emily lowered the weapon slowly. Vasquez. Special Agent Dana Vasquez stared at her for 2 full seconds. I didn't know you were here. Nobody did. Emily stepped aside to let the cart through. She needs the O right now. I'll debrief you in 20 minutes. Vasquez looked at Alves. Her jaw tightened. She stepped back and made room and said into her radio in rapid clipped language that the subject was alive and en route to surgery and the building needed to be locked down floor by floor. Starting from the ground, Emily followed the cart toward the O doors. Behind her, Vasquez said. Tran. The 2 operatives from the stairwell woke up. The one you put down in the approach corridor is secured. We found a 4th one in the basement trying to access the server room. A pause. They weren't alone. Emily stopped. What does that mean? She said. It means whoever planned this had inside access. Facility layout. Shift schedule. Security camera positioning. Emily turned around. You're telling me someone in this hospital? I'm telling you. Someone gave them a map. Vasquez said. And that map was current, updated within the last 48 hours. The surgical suite doors were open ahead of her. Alves was going through. Voss was already gowned. Emily stood in the hallway between the O and Vasquez and felt the night rearrange itself around a fact she hadn't had 20 seconds ago. She thought about Voss coming back to the hospital twice tonight when there was no clinical reason to. She thought about the conversation in his office, the specific questions, the way he'd looked at her when she said the word Heil. She thought about the pen, the clicking. She looked at Vasquez. When you secured the fourth operative, the one in the basement. Yes. Did he have a phone on him? We're processing his equipment now. Clears throat. Check the recent contacts, Emily said. Check if any of them match an internal hospital number. Vasquez held her gaze. Something in her expression shifted. The particular shift of someone who has just understood a question they weren't expecting. She spoke into her radio. Emily waited in the hallway, listening to the O doors close behind Alves, listening to the building settle around the aftermath of an hour that had gutted 14 months of careful, quiet, invisible life. The radio crackled. Vasquez listened. Her face did something careful. She looked at Emily. There's a match, she said. One number. It goes to a hospital extension. She looked down at whatever her team was reading her. The extension is registered to the Chief of Surgical Services. The extension was registered to the Chief of Surgical Services. Emily stood in the surgical corridor and let that land. Not with surprise exactly, because the pieces had been arranging themselves in the back of her mind for hours, without her consciously assembling them. The twice returning, the specific questions in his office, the way he looked at her when she named Hale, when she took control of the bay, when she moved through this building like someone who knew what she was doing, the irritation that had something underneath it, not just ego, not just territorial medicine, but something that looked in retrospect more like concern, not concern for the patients, concern about what she might find. Vasquez was watching her. You knew him. I worked with him. Emily's voice came out flat every day for 14 months. Did you have any indication? No. She stopped, reconsidered. He asked me tonight who I was directly in a way that people don't usually ask, unless they already have a reason to. She looked at the O doors. He's in there right now, with Alves. Vasquez moved before she finished the sentence. Emily was a step behind her through the O doors and into the scrub corridor, and Vasquez already had 2 of her team flanking the inner door. She pushed through without knocking. The O didn't work that way. The protocols went out the window under a federal badge and a specific kind of urgency, and Emily came in behind her. The room was mid-procedure. Alves on the table draped her chest open in the way that turned a human body into a technical problem. Was at the primary position. Hands inside the field, 2 surgical residents flanking him, Clear's throat, the anesthesiologist at the head, a woman named Park, who was looking at the new arrivals with sharp alarm. Voss looked up. He saw Vasquez. He saw the badge. He saw Emily. His hands did not move. He did Clear's throat, not step back from the table. A surgeon in the middle of a procedure has a particular leverage. You can't pull someone out of an open chest without killing the patient. And whatever else Voss was, he was enough of a clinician to know that, and possibly to be counting on it. I'm in the middle of something, he said. I can see that, Vasquez said. Finish it. Don't leave this room. Am I under arrest? You're under federal hold pending interview. When this patient is closed, you'll come with me. The O was silent, except for the monitors. Park looked at Voss, then at Vasquez, then made the decision that anesthesiologists make in situations where the room has become something other than a room. She focused on her panel and stayed there because her job was to keep this woman breathing, and that job did not change based on what was happening around it. Voss looked back down at the field. His face was controlled. She'd give him that, whatever he was feeling, and she could see something in the set of his jaw that had the texture of a man whose options have just significantly narrowed. He kept it out of his hands. Then let me finish, he said. Vasquez stepped back. She positioned one of her people at the interior door, and the other at the scrub corridor entry, and they waited. Emily watched Voss work for 40 seconds. His technique was exactly what it had always been. Precise, economical, the movements of someone who had done this thousands of times. She thought about 14 months, of watching him walk through this building like he owned the floor under his feet, the pen clicking, the name he never used correctly, the way he'd carved out space for his own authority by systematically reducing everyone else. She thought about Warren Delgado, about the boy Marcus with his hidden bleed, about Graves in Bay Nelia, and the resident who had started compressions because of how she'd said it, not because of who she was. She thought about all the things she'd held back for 14 months so that men like Voss could keep believing the ceiling they put on her was real. She left the O. There was work to do. Dumped. The debrief happened in the surgical waiting room, beige chairs, a dead plant in the corner, a vending machine humming to itself because it was the largest secure space on the 4th floor that wasn't currently occupied by a trauma patient or a federal hold. Vasquez sat across from Emily with a tablet and a recorder, and the manner of someone who had a lot of ground to cover and limited patience for anything that wasn't ground. Start from when you got the call, Vasquez said. Emily started from when she got the call. She was concise. 14 years of operational reporting had built that into her the way breathing was built in. Structured and economical, with the parts that mattered. Vasquez listened without interrupting, which was also a skill. When Emily finished, Vasquez was quiet for a moment. The 2 operatives you detained in the stairwell, the one in the approach corridor. How did you? She stopped herself. Never mind. I've read the file. You have my file. I have access to your file. There's a difference. Vasquez set the tablet down. Tran, you've been here 14 months. Harwick Memorial, Caldwell Bay, a name you don't use, and an address registered to a shell account. The people who arranged your extraction from active service went to considerable effort. I know. Voss's communications with the network go back 8 months. He didn't know who you were when you arrived, but something tipped him recently. The last contact log between his extension and the network's relay number was 46 hours ago. Emily went still. 2 days ago. 46 hours. You said he was in the building twice tonight, with no clear clinical reason. He was already moving when I came back in after I got the call. She worked it out in her head. He knew the convoy was coming before I did, which means he wasn't tipped by me. He was tipped by the network. They told him what was coming. They told him to be here and to watch what you did when it arrived. Vasquez held her gaze. He wasn't just providing them a map of this facility. He was providing them a map of you. The vending machine hummed. Down the hall, someone's radio crackled and went quiet. He never thought I was a threat, Emily said. He thought I was incompetent. He dismissed me because he needed to. Because if he'd taken me seriously, he'd have had to explain to the network why a floor nurse was operating at the level I was operating at. She looked at the dead plant in the corner. His contempt was protection for him. Until tonight. Until tonight. Vasquez picked the tablet back up. The network, the group that organized the Dresner ambush, this is the 3rd operation we've linked to them in 18 months. They embed assets in civilian infrastructure, medical, transport, communications, places that are hard to sweep and easy to use. She scrolled. Voss was recruited approximately 2 years ago, based on the financial pattern. He had a debt situation offshore, structured to be invisible, unless you know what to look for. They cleared it. He provided access. What kind of access? Personnel data for this hospital, security schematics, shift schedules, and, when relevant, patient information, specifically, information about high V-value patients that might pass through a level 1 trauma center in this corridor. Emily thought about that, about the patients who'd come through Harwick over 14 months, about Warren Delgado, and how she'd almost wondered afterward if his arrival had been coincidence. Was Delgado? She started. We don't know yet. We're looking. Vasquez set the tablet down again. What I know right now is that Director Alves is in surgery because of you. The 4 operatives who came through this building are in custody. And Dr. Nolan Voss is standing in an O, waiting to be arrested. She said it plainly without ceremony. But Emily heard the thing underneath it, the acknowledgement, precise and unoriented, of what had happened tonight and who had made it happen. It didn't feel like vindication yet. It felt like a lot of things that would need time to settle. I need to check on my patients, Emily said. Whooped. The 3rd floor was quieter than she'd left it. Terry Bosch was at the nurse's station, running the night with the same methodical calm he always ran it with, though the look he gave her when she came off the elevator was different from his usual look. It had more in it, more questions than he was going to ask right now. Your guy in room 9 was asking for you, he said. I told him you were tied up. I'll check on him. Emily, he said her name carefully. Donna called. She heard something on the scanner. She wanted to know if you were okay. Something unexpected happened in her chest. Nothing dramatic. A small compression, the kind that comes from learning that someone thought to check. Tell her I'm okay, she said. I'll call her tomorrow. She checked the patients. 3 stable, 2 improving. 1 she adjusted medication, on after reading the overnight notes. She changed the dressing. She answered a call light for a man in room 12 who just wanted the blanket readjusted and then wanted to talk about his son's baseball game for 4 minutes, and she let him because it was kolme, nolla in the morning, and he was scared, and the baseball game was real, and the conversation cost her 4 minutes and gave him something. She was human like that occasionally. She let herself be. Yes, at 3:20 am, the O light went off. She was at the nurse's station when it happened. The small indicator above the elevator panel that she'd been watching with one part of her attention for the past hour. She took the elevator up. The surgical recovery suite was bright and controlled. Alves was off the table and onto the post-op bed, vitals stabilized, color returning in the slow way that bodies reclaim themselves after being that close to the edge. Ortega was beside her, which was not standard post-op protocol, but which nobody in this particular situation had tried to correct. He'd gotten the protein bar and apparently a cup of coffee from somewhere, and he looked like a man who had been pulled back from something by the threat of his own willpower and was very gradually remembering how to breathe normally. The surgeon who had closed, one of the residents, a woman named Yo, who had been in the room when Voss was pulled out and had finished the procedure with the steadiness of someone who had not let the contact shake her hands, was documenting at the side station. Emily looked at her. She's clean, both fragments removed. There was more lateral damage than the imaging suggested, but we got it. Yo looked up briefly. Xa. I know the medic who managed her in the vehicle. What? Whatever he did, he bought her enough time. Any later, and it wouldn't have mattered how good the surgical team was. Emily looked at Ortega. He was staring at the floor. He heard. She could see the particular stillness of a person absorbing something they needed to hear. You did good, she said to him again. He looked up. You already said that. I know I'm saying it again. He nodded, looked back at Alves. The exhaustion was settling into his face now, the way it always did when the emergency was finally technically over. The body remembering all the hours it had spent not acknowledging itself. Alvis's eyes opened. She was groggy. Anesthesia doing its slow exit, but she found Emily's face with the same deliberate effort she demonstrated all night. Her right hand moved. Emily stepped closer. Did you? Alves's voice was rough, depleted. Did the line. Vasquez has the line, Emily said. The 400 check-in has been handled. Your operation is secure. Alva's eyes closed. Not out of pain. Something releasing the last held tension of a night that had tried very hard to end differently. Voss, she said. One word. In federal custody. Vasquez has him. A pause. Was it him all the way, or was he used? Emily said. I think mostly used, but he made a choice. The depth, the contact, The map he gave them. Those were choices. She watched Alves's face. He's not the top of it. No, Alves opened her eyes again. Not close to the top. She looked at Emily with the focused clarity of someone surfacing through medication towards something important. The network has 3 more embedded assets in this region. I have names. 2 of them are in civilian infrastructure. One is closer to you than you'd want. How close? That's what we need to talk about when I'm less. She gestured vaguely at her own condition. Rest, Emily said. The names will keep for Cox hours. They've kept longer than they should have already. But Alves' eyes were drifting, the body winning over the will. Finally, after a night that had run on nothing but the ladder. Don't disappear again, she said, almost inaudible. We need people who... She was asleep before she finished. Emily stood beside the bed for a moment. The recovery suite was quiet around her. Monitors, ventilation, the small, careful sounds of a medical environment doing its most important work, which was just keeping people alive long enough for things to get better. She went back downstairs. Voss was in the surgical waiting room, the same beige chairs, the same dead plant, when Vasquez brought him out. He had changed out of his surgical gear into the spare clothes he kept in his office, which gave him a strange diminished quality. The transition from professional armor into a person in a grey sweater and dark pants at Nelia in the morning. He was not handcuffed, not yet. There was a federal agent on either side of him and Vasquez in front, and the quality of his freedom was such that the absence of physical restraints was almost more pointed than their presence would have been. He saw Emily. She was standing at the nurse's station desk down the hall, charting. She could have been anywhere else in the building. She was charting because there were 3 patients whose overnight documentation needed attention, and the work existed regardless of the night surrounding it. He stopped. The agents flanking him paused. Tran, he said. She looked up. He opened his mouth, closed it. Whatever he had been going to say, the sentence structure of it seemed to have failed him. He'd spent a professional lifetime arriving in rooms with exactly the right thing to say. The decisive diagnosis, the surgical direction, the management of every situation from behind the insulation of authority and position. He had no architecture for this moment. She waited. She was not going to help him find the words. That wasn't cruelty. It was just that some things needed to be located entirely on their own. I didn't know you were. I didn't know who. He stopped again. I made a decision 2 years ago that I can't another stop. His jaw worked. The depth. It was 46 hours ago. She said, you knew what was coming. You knew. And you didn't warn anyone in this building. He flinched. Visible. Undeniable. People almost died tonight, she said. 2 of Reeves' team took injuries on the ground floor. Your patients, the ones you operated on this week, whose files were in the system you gave them access to. Their information is in a network database that federal investigators are currently pulling apart. She looked at him steadily. The thing you were most afraid of when you were trying to figure out who I was that I'd find something that should have been found. You were right to be afraid of that. He didn't say anything. Go, she said. Vasquez moved him forward. He walked past Emily's station with the agents beside him, and he did not look at her again. And she watched him go with the flatness of someone who has spent a year being diminished by a man, and has arrived at the moment of his accounting, and found it is not as satisfying as anger would like it to be, because he was also just a person who had made a catastrophically wrong choice, and wrong choices at that scale mostly just made her tired. She went back to charting. Dawn was still Cox hours away when Hale found her. She was in the break room, the same counter, but this time she was sitting down, which meant a chair had been available, or she'd taken one without asking because she was past the point of performing ordinary discomfort. He came in, filled a cup from the coffee machine that had been running continuously since midnight, and sat across from her. Vasquez briefed me. He said, I know. She told me about your background. He held the cup in both hands. The service record, the extraction, what you were doing here. I know that too. She used the phrase decorated beyond what's typically disclosed. She said that 3 times. I think she was trying to tell me something. She was. He was quiet for a moment. The coffee machine finished its cycle and clicked into silence. You've been on my 3rd floor for 14 months, he said. You've managed patients at a level that I have been incorrectly, it seems, attributing to good instincts and training. He paused. I owe you an honest statement. I should have looked harder. Not because I suspected anything. I didn't, but because someone who performs the way you perform deserved to be seen more clearly than I saw you. Emily looked at her coffee. You protected me from Voss. Not enough. I gave him space I shouldn't have given him because his surgical outcomes were excellent and his patient satisfaction scores were strong, and those things created a credit account that I let him spend on behavior that he stopped. Compressed it. That was a management failure, among other failures tonight. You had no reason to know what Voss was. No, but I had plenty of reason to know what you were. He met her eyes, and I let someone define that for me instead of determining it myself. She didn't answer right away. The honesty in it deserved a moment. What happens now? She said federally. Vasquez has this building for as long as she needs it. Voss is going to be processed. She said the financial evidence alone is significant. The network connection puts it in a different category. He set down the cup, clinically. I have a hospital that needs a chief of surgical services immediately, as of tonight. That's not my problem. No, but your contract situation is. He looked at her carefully. Whatever your status was here, the cover identity, the documentation, I imagine that becomes complicated now. She'd been thinking about that. The name, the records, the carefully constructed 14 months. Vasquez had implied that the protection architecture could be restructured, but restructuring took time, and time required decisions she hadn't made yet. I don't know what I'm doing next, she said. It was the most honest thing she'd said out loud in months, and it came out easier than she expected. Maybe because the night had stripped off enough of the careful management that honesty was simply what was left. You don't have to decide at Nelia. Nolla a me, he said. No, but Emily. He said her name with the deliberate quality she'd noticed before. Careful. Waited. Whatever you decide, you should know that what happened in this building tonight, the people who are alive because of you, that is a clear and documented fact. Whatever you were hiding, whatever you were afraid of, that fact doesn't change. She looked at him. He was not giving her a speech. He was not reaching for something cinematic. He was tired like everyone in this building was tired, and he was saying a true thing because it was true, and it needed saying. That was all. Thank you, she said. He nodded. He finished the coffee. He left. She sat alone in the break room for 3 more minutes, which was all she allowed herself, and then she got up and went back to work. At 15 Reeves found her on the 3rd floor. He was still in his operational gear, which at this hour had the rumpled, lived-in quality of a man who had been in it for a long time. He had a cut on his left forearm bandaged with what she recognized as the field dressings from her own supply cart. She made a note to have someone look at that properly. The 4th operative, he said, the one in the basement. What about him? He talked. Reeves leaned against the wall, not casual, exhausted. There was a difference. The network, the Dresner ambush, how they knew Director Alves's route. He paused. He gave us a name. Someone inside the intelligence division, someone who accessed her travel schedule and routing coups days ago. She processed that inside the division. Not Voss, be Voss, was downstream. This is a source they've had in place for colmy years. Reeves looked at her. The name is Haraman. Does that know? She went through her memory the way she'd been trained to. Fast, organized, categorical. Not from my time. From Alves's current operation, he straightened. Vasquez is running it down now, but it means the ambush. And tonight, they're connected to something larger than we thought when we loaded up the convoy. How much larger? We don't know yet. He was quiet for a moment. The night floor stretched out around them, a monitor alarming softly in room 11. Terry's voice at the station, asking someone something routine. The building's ordinary rhythm reasserting itself over everything that had happened to it. Tran Reeves said, "The squad, the people I brought in tonight, they were told we were picking up a wounded federal officer and delivering her to a hospital. They were not told to expect what we found here." He held her gaze. "I've been doing this for right toista years and I've never seen a civilian, not active, not reserved, nobody not currently in a combat role, do what you did tonight in that stairwell in that corridor." She waited. "I'm not asking you anything," he said. "I'm not recruiting. I know that's not," he paused. "I just wanted to say it to your face, so you'd know someone said it." She nodded. "Appreciated." He left. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Down the corridor, the elevator opened, and Vasquez stepped out with 2 of her team. She moved with the energy of someone who had found something. Not satisfied energy, operational energy, the kind that had a direction. She stopped when she reached Emily. She looked at her quick, assessing with the kind of shorthand that came from people who had trained in the same rooms and spoken the same language. "Haramman," Vasquez said. "He's already been alerted. Someone in this building or someone monitoring this building's communications sent a signal in the past 6 hours. He knows the operation is compromised." Emily felt the floor shift slightly under the night. "He's running. He's trying." Vasquez pulled out her phone. "We have a tracking lead, but it's going to close fast. I need to move." She stopped. She looked at Emily with something that wasn't quite a question and wasn't quite a decision and sat somewhere between them. Emily read it immediately. "No," she said. "Whatever you're thinking. You know things about this network's methodology that aren't in any file I have access to. You spent 2 years embedded in Vasquez. 40 minutes. I need 40 minutes and a read on 3 pieces of intel that could save us 6 hours." Emily looked at the 3rd floor around her, at the patients in their rooms, at Terry managing the station, at the hospital doing its irreducible work of keeping people breathing. At the life she had built here, imperfect, diminished, carefully managed, sometimes aching in its limitations, but hers, 40 minutes, she said. Vasquez nodded. She started moving. Emily pulled off her badge and set it on the nurse's station counter. She looked at Terry. "I'll be back," she said. "I know," he said. He didn't look up from his documentation, but there was something in his voice that meant he'd understood the contours of this night better than anyone had given him reason to, and that he was, despite everything, without fanfare, glad she was still in the building to say it. She followed Vasquez to the elevator, the doors closed. On the 4th floor in the surgical recovery suite, Claudia Alves slept with the particular depth of someone who had been kept alive by a combination of skill, stubbornness, and the presence of a person the world had been told was no longer in service. On a chair beside this bed, Ortega was also asleep, his head dropped forward, one hand still loosely near the IV line, even in unconsciousness, because some training runs deeper than sleep. In the security hub on the ground floor, Roar was compiling a report that would eventually run to 47 pages and describe in careful bureaucratic language a night that bureaucratic language was not quite built for. And in the surgical waiting room under federal hold, Dr. Nolan Voss sat alone with the dead plant and the humming vending machine and the specific silence of a man who had spent 2 years making a calculation and was now confronted with the full cost of being wrong. Not wrong about the debt, not wrong about the network, but wrong about the fundamental thing, the one that had made every other mistake possible, the woman he had spent 14 months refusing to see. He sat in a big chair, and he waited. Outside, the fog was finally beginning to thin at its edges. The first suggestion of a different kind of light was finding the water. Not dawn yet, but the thing that comes before it, the hour when the darkness starts negotiating with what's coming. Inside the elevator, the doors opened on the ground floor. Emily walked out, and Vasquez was 2 steps ahead of her. And on Vasquez's tablet, the tracking signal for a man named Haramman was moving northwest at the speed of someone who believed he had enough of a head start. He didn't know that head starts only matter if the person behind you can be outrun. Emily walked out of the hospital, into the almost dark, and looked at the signal on the tablet and said, "He's heading for the water. There's a private dock at the north end of Caldwell Bay. It's not on any public record, but it's where this network's regional assets have staged 2 previous extractions." Vasquez looked at her. "That's not in any file." "No," Emily said. "It's not." Vasquez was already relaying the coordinates. Emily stood in the fog-thin dark outside Harwick Memorial and breathed the salt air of Caldwell Bay and felt for the first time in 2 years, maybe longer, like someone who was exactly where they were supposed to be, doing exactly what they were built to do. Not comfortable, not safe, not the quiet, invisible life she'd constructed and protected and hidden inside, but true. Real hers in a way that the hiding had never been. Her phone buzzed. Different number. Short message. "No. Sender ID. Haramman isn't running alone. Check who authorized his travel clearance 2 days ago." She stared at it. She looked at Vasquez. "Someone just sent me something," she said. From inside. Vasquez took the phone. "Read it." Her face did the careful, complicated thing it had been doing since she'd arrived in this building. 2 days ago, Vasquez said, slowly. "That's when the routing for Alves's convoy was accessed." She looked at Emily. "If Haramman's clearance was authorized by someone above him, then the leak isn't Haramman." Emily said, "Haramman is another layer. Someone used him the way they used Voss." The tracking signal on the tablet blinked, still moving northwest. "How high does this go?" Emily said. Vasquez looked at the tablet, at the signal at the hospital behind them. At Emily. "Higher," she said, "than anyone in that building tonight was prepared for." The tracking signal moved northwest at a steady pace. That meant a vehicle, not a person on foot. And that meant whoever was driving it felt secure enough to not be running yet. That was a mistake. People who felt secure made the specific mistakes of people who had never been truly cornered, who had always had a door to step through when a room got too small. Emily and Vasquez took one of the federal SUVs. Vasquez drove. 2 of her team followed in a second vehicle. The streets of Caldwell Bay at 5 in the morning were empty in the particular way of coastal cities before dawn. All the weight of the water somewhere close, the fog sitting lower near the waterfront, the street lights doing their best against it. "The clearance authorization," Emily said, "who has the access level to sign off on convoy routing for a director-level official, deputy level and above, and 1 administrative tier that processes logistics, officially supports staff. Practically, they see everything." Vasquez kept her eyes on the road. "I've already flagged it to my superior. There are 4 names in the authorization window for the Tuesday period. We'll have movement records on all 4 within the hour. Haramman will know we're coming before we reach the dock. Probably, which means whoever warned him is still active, still inside the communication network. Yes." Emily looked out the window at the moving dark. "Then arresting Haramman isn't the end of it. It's the next layer. It's always the next layer." Vasquez said it without bitterness, just the flatness of someone who'd been doing this long enough to have made peace with that particular truth. "That's the work." Emily didn't answer. She was watching the waterfront come up through the fog. The private dock the network had used twice before, which wasn't in any file Vasquez had because it had been operational intelligence, the kind that lived in people rather than documents, and which Emily carried the way she carried a lot of things, quietly waiting for the moment it was needed. The dock was a grey rectangle of weathered wood extending over black water. A single vessel, private, mid-sized, running lights off, and on the dock, 2 figures moving with the specific urgency of people loading the last things before they leave. Vasquez radioed her second vehicle. Standard interception, clean and fast. What happened next took 4 minutes. It was not clean, exactly. One of the figures went for the water and made it 12 FT before Reeves's people, who had come from the north approach, were waiting at the ladder, but it was fast, and when it was over, both figures were detained on the dock with the grey. Water beneath them, and the first real light beginning somewhere east. Haramman was the smaller one, 50, unremarkable face, the kind of man designed by temperament and profession to be unnoticed. He looked at Vasquez with the calculation of someone immediately assessing what he had left to trade. He looked at Emily with something different, something that took a moment to arrive. Recognition. "You're Tran," he said. He said it like the name explained the night. "I am," she said. "They said you were out." They were wrong. He looked at the federal badges around him, at the water, at the options that were no longer options. Something in him made the decision that people in his position eventually made, not from conscience, but from arithmetic. "I want a conversation before any formal processing," he said to Vasquez. "You'll get a lawyer," Vasquez said. "I want a conversation first about the authorization, about the name above mine." He held her gaze. "Because if you go up the chain without knowing what's actually there, you'll reach the wrong conclusion and you'll lose the case at the level that matters." Vasquez looked at Emily. 1 second of communication that required no words. 40 minutes, Vasquez said. "In the vehicle, my terms," he nodded. Emily stepped back. The sky to the east was doing something pale and tentative. The dark giving way in increments, the water below the dock, shifting from black to a very deep gray. She stood on the dock alone for a moment. The case was moving past her now into the machinery of federal processing, where it would grind for months and produce outcomes she'd be informed of but not central to. That was fine. She understood where the work ended and where the institution took over. And she'd long ago made peace with the part of her that wanted to follow every thread to its end personally. She was tired. Not operationally tired, but something older than that. The kind of tired that came from carrying something heavy for a very long time and only now being allowed to set it down. She set it down just for a moment on a grey dock over grey water in the early Caldwell Bay morning. Then she turned and went back to work. The drive back to Harwick Memorial was quieter. Vasquez was on the phone for most of it, her voice low and rapid, relaying Haramman's preliminary information up a chain that Emily wasn't tracking. She caught fragments, a name she didn't recognize, an office, she did, a level of authorization that confirmed what the anonymous message had implied. The source above Haramman was not field level, not logistics. Someone with enough clearance and enough distance from the operational reality to believe they could organize an assassination and remain untouchable by it. They were wrong about that too. She thought about the category of person who looked at a network of embedded assets, Voss, Haramman, the operatives and tactical gear, the ones who had moved through Harwick's corridors, toward a woman who was supposed to be dying and saw only a mechanism, a tool, something that could be arranged and deployed and, if necessary, discarded. She thought about what it cost to be the person on the receiving end of that calculus, what it cost to be the cargo in the convoy bleeding across hours of dark road, what it cost to be the people in the building who hadn't known what was coming and had handled it anyway. Decker, Saris, Ortega, Rohr, Terry, Bosch, calling in staff, with no explanation, and trusting that there was one. She thought about what it cost to be the person who had to be invisible to stay safe, and whether the safety was worth it, and what the answer was now that the question was no longer hypothetical. The hospital appeared through the thinning fog, pale and lit, the same as always. She went in through the ambulance bay. Old habit, Tink, Donna was there, not on shift. She wasn't scheduled until 7. Nolla, but she was there at 5. 40 in civilian clothes, with a cup of coffee from the place 2 blocks over that opened early, standing near the bay entrance, with the expression of a woman who had heard enough second-hand information to come in early and wasn't going to apologize for it. She looked at Emily for a long moment, at the state of her, the bruise blooming purple under her right eye, the fatigue, the operational residue that Emily had never quite been able to scrub out of how she held herself after a night like this. "Sit down," Donna said. "I'm fine. I know you're fine. Sit down anyway." Emily sat on the bench outside the bay doors. Donna sat beside her and handed her the coffee, which Emily took because it was offered and because she was too tired to manage gestures at this hour. "Are you going to tell me?" Donna said some of it eventually. "Not now. Not now." They sat. The sky was lighter now. Not sunrise yet, but committed to it. The dark having made its final exit sometime in the last 20 minutes without Emily noticing. "Vos," Donna said. Not a question. Yes, Donna processed that. I never liked him. I know. I'm not saying that to be right. I'm saying it because it took too long for it to matter that I didn't like him. And I'm going to be thinking about that for a while. Emily looked at her. Donna was looking at the water. Her jaw set at the angle it went when she was working something out that she wasn't going to let herself deflect from. She was one of those people who held themselves accountable to a standard they'd mostly chosen themselves, which was harder than the kind other people set. You didn't know, Emily said. No, but I knew enough to know you were being managed down. And I let it happen because the clinical outcomes were strong, and Hale had bigger things, and I told myself it wasn't my fight. She paused. That was wrong. Emily didn't tell her it wasn't. That kind of comfort was the kind that felt kind in the moment and cost something later. It's over now, she said instead. Donna looked at her. Is it over for you, or does over mean something different for someone like you? Emily thought about Haraman in the federal vehicle, trading information for margin, about the name above his that Vasquez chain was now working toward, about the anonymous message on her phone that had come from inside a network that presumably still had active nodes. It's mostly over, she said. Donna accepted that with the pragmatism of a woman who'd worked emergency medicine for 20 years and had a calibrated sense of what mostly meant. Go sleep, she said. I'll cover your patients until 7. You're not on until... Go sleep, Emily. Emily stood. She looked at Donna, this practical, exacting, genuinely decent woman who had offered her a form of care that asked nothing of her and came without performance. Thank you, she said. For earlier this year, when you told me to think about whether this was the right place to hide. She paused. You were right. Donna looked at her steadily. Were you hiding from something specific, or just from being seen? It was the most precise question anyone had asked her in 6 years. Both Emily said. Yeah, Donna said most people are. That's the debrief with Vasquez happened at 9:00 am. In Hale's office, which Vasquez had commandeered with a federal request that Hale had accommodated without visible resentment. He sat in the chair to the side, his own office, his own chair, but he'd shifted it to make room, which was a small thing that said something about him. Vasquez lied out what they had. The network, which the DoD had been tracking under an operation named Emily, wasn't cleared to know, and which Vasquez told her anyway, because the night had functionally rendered the clearance distinction moot, had been running embedded assets in Pacific Northwest infrastructure for colmy years. Medical, transport, communications. 9 confirmed assets, 4 of whom were in federal custody this morning, 3 more identified and being located. The remaining 2 were operational unknowns. Voss's role had been primarily formational. He provided Harwick's internal data, staffing, security, patient records on 4 separate occasions over 8 months. The financial forensics on his offshore account made the timeline clear. He had not been involved in operational planning, which in federal terms was the distinction between a serious charge and a career-ending one. He was looking at the career-ending one. Harriman had provided the convoy routing and Alves's travel schedule. His information also implicated the authorization source, a deputy-level official whose name Vasquez said plainly, and which landed in the room with the particular weight of a name that people in institutions recognize as someone they'd treated as permanent furniture. Hale said quietly, I've met him twice at regional health security briefings. Most people have, Vasquez said. That's the point. The man's name was Al Ford. He had signed off on Haraman's clearance renewal 2 days before the ambush. He had accessed Alves's routing through a logistics oversight function that was routine enough to be invisible. He had made 11 calls in the past 72 hours to a relay number the federal team had been tracking for nearly months without knowing what it connected to. He'd been taken into custody at 6:40 that morning in an airport terminal with a carry-on bag and a ticket to a city that did not have an extradition arrangement with the relevant federal jurisdiction. That detail, the ticket, the bag, the specific calculation of where he thought he was going, was the one that said the most not about guilt, which was already established, about a certain kind of person who builds their entire career on believing themselves exempt from consequences, who looks at every system and sees not a set of rules, but a set of levers, and who only begins to understand what they've actually built when the levers stop moving the way they expect. He'd had a carry-on bag. He thought he was going to make the flight. He hadn't made the flight. Vasquez finished the briefing and looked at Emily. Your cooperation last night is being formally documented. The Dresner ambush, the hospital breach, Herman's apprehension. The outcome on all three directly reflects your involvement. I was doing my job, Emily said. Which job? Vasquez said, not unkind, genuinely asking. Emily looked at her hands on the conference table. The bruise on her cheek had peaked overnight. She'd looked at it in a mirror at 7, 0 AM, and it was impressive. A purple-yellow map of the moment on the landing when she hadn't moved quite fast enough. It would fade. These things always faded. Both, she said. Same answer she'd given Donna. It felt truer the second time. Vasquez nodded. The protection architecture you've been operating under is being restructured. That's a conversation for next week, not this morning. But I want you to know the decision about what comes next is yours entirely. She paused. There are people who would very much like it if what came next involved coming back in. I know. And next week, Emily said. That's a conversation for next week. Vasquez almost smiled. Fair. Hale walked her out down the elevator, through the 3rd floor, past the nurse's station, where Terry was running the day shift handoff, past room 9, where her post-op patient was awake and reading, past the supply room, where she'd stood in the dark the evening before, and run her diagnostics, and told herself to be more careful. At the stairwell door, he stopped. I need to say something to you, he said. Officially as CMO of this hospital. She waited. What happened last night? The clinical decisions you made, the patient outcomes you drove, the interventions in those bays. I've been in medicine for 30 years. What you did in this building with the resources you had and the conditions you were operating under is exceptional. That's not a word I use. He met her gaze. I should have seen it earlier. I should have protected you from an environment that was actively working to diminish you. I didn't. That is a failure of leadership on my part, and I'm not going to dress it up. She started to say something. Let me finish. He wasn't sharp about it. Just clear. I'd like you to stay. Not in the same role. I won't insult you with the same role. I'm proposing a clinical lead position on the trauma team, which is what your skills and background warrant. The title, the compensation, the authority to function at the level you actually function at. He paused. Whatever your name situation looks like after Vasquez's team is done restructuring it, I'll work with whatever you give me. This hospital needs you, not the version you were pretending to be. You, she looked at the stairwell door. She thought about 14 months of taking the stairs because the elevator made her feel trapped. About the freight tote bag, and the lukewarm coffee, and the badge she'd clipped at an angle she never bothered to straighten. About the 30 seconds in a supply room with the lights off, because it was the only place with no cameras. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. She pushed through the stairwell door. She took the stairs. The full staff acknowledgement happened 6 days later, not by design, but by the nature of how hospitals work. Word had spread the way it always spread in medical environments through the compression chamber of a building full of people who communicated continuously and had no actual mechanism for compartmentalizing something this large. Everyone knew, not the classified parts. Those stayed classified because Vasquez's team had been clear about what could and couldn't be released to a civilian institution. But the shape of it was known. The convoy, the breach, the night shift that had turned into something no one had signed up for and everyone had handled, and what Emily had done in the middle of it. Hale called a floor meeting at 7. Not an announcement. A meeting, the kind where people stood in the break room in the hallway overflow, where the night shift hadn't left yet and the day shift was already in, where the residents crowded near the door and the attendants stood in the back, trying to look like they weren't paying close attention. He was brief. He said what happened. He said who had kept the patients in those trauma bays alive. He said the name clearly. Emily Tran, trauma team lead, as of this week, pending formal transition. And he said it without the qualifying architecture that institutions typically built around acknowledgements like this one. The exceptional circumstances and extraordinary contributions language that turned recognition into fine print. He just said it plainly to the room. She was standing near the coffee machine. She had not slept enough. The bruise on her cheek was still visible. She was holding a paper cup that had gone cold while Hale was talking. And when the room turned to look at her, she felt the weight of all those eyes and resisted the reflex to find something to look at on the floor. She looked back. Calloway was near the front. He'd been one of the first to arrive, and he was looking at her the way he'd looked at her after Graves in Bay Nelia, with the expression of someone whose internal accounting had just been corrected. Beside him, Priya had her arms crossed and her chin up in the particular way that meant she was trying not to show that she was moved. Saras gave her a short nod from across the room. Decker had his arms folded and was looking at the window, which was where people who'd been in military environments looked when they were acknowledging something they didn't want to make a performance of. Terry Bosch, who was leaning against the far wall with a coffee that was probably also cold, looked at her for a moment and then looked away because he was Terry and he had never needed a room to tell him what he already knew. Ortega was there. He'd come back, not scheduled, just back. Because Alvis was still in recovery, and he was the kind of person who came back. He looked at Emily with the exhausted, clear-eyed expression of someone who had spent a long night near the edge of something and had come out with the particular gratitude of a person who understands they were lucky and also that luck was not the whole of it. And Donna was there in the back in her workclothes now, coffee in hand, watching Emily with the steady look of someone who had said a true thing 2 days ago and was watching it be confirmed. When Hale finished, the room was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable quiet, the kind that meant something was being held, and nobody wanted to break it too fast. Then someone started clapping. She didn't see who started it. It didn't matter. It moved through the room the way things moved through a room of people who'd spent a night in proximity to something real and needed somewhere to put what it had cost them. Emily stood by the coffee machine and let it happen. She didn't deflect it. She didn't perform humility, or brush it off, or look at the floor. She had spent too long making herself smaller than she was, and she was done with the practice of it, and the least she could do was receive what this room was offering without flinching. She wasn't comfortable. She was honest. There was a difference, and she was learning to live in it. Call me days later, Claudia Alves asked to see her. The recovery room was quieter now. A private room on the 5th floor, daylight coming through the window, the monitoring equipment reduced to the minimum that her improving status required. She was sitting up. Her color was almost normal. She still moved with the careful economy of someone managing significant pain, but the clarity in her eyes was complete. I told the review board about you, Alves said. Emily sat in the chair beside the bed. What did you tell them? That without your presence in this building, I would have died. That 4 operatives who needed to be in federal custody are in federal custody. That the network's Pacific Northwest operation has been effectively dismantled in 72 hours in a way that would have taken us 6 more months otherwise. She held Emily's gaze. I told them the truth. All of it. Including why I was here. Including why you were here. Alves paused. The extraction protocol you were placed under Cox years ago, that's been formally reviewed. The original threat assessment has been updated. The person who generated the threat no longer presents a risk. Emily sat with that. She'd known it abstractly from things Vasquez had said in passing, but hearing it said plainly by the person with the authority to say it had a different weight. You're clear, Alvisa said. Your record, your name, everything that was sealed or reclassified in the transition, it's been formally reinstated. Decorated service, full commendations, the citation from Kessler forward that was pulled from the public record. She paused. You exist again completely. Emily looked at the window. The water was visible from this floor. The bay, grey-green in the afternoon light, moving with the slow persistence of something that didn't need to be told to keep going. Vasquez said, You might come back in, she said. That's a separate conversation, and it's entirely your decision. I'm not here to recruit you. Alves leaned back slightly. I'm here because you kept me alive, and I wanted to say it to your face, and because you deserve to know that what you were, what you are, is not something that gets to be buried by someone else's choices. Not mine, not the protocols, not anyone's. Emily thought about something. She thought about the way she'd learned to drop a chart and stumble over words and let her badge sit at an angle, and how it had become such practiced fluency that there were days she'd caught herself not knowing where the act ended. She thought about Vos, not with anger, because anger was an investment she wasn't going to keep making, in a man who was now in the process of losing everything that had made him feel like the ceiling of other people's worth. She thought about him with something closer to the recognition that the most dangerous kind of contempt is the kind that gets inside you. That makes you perform smallness so long that you have to remind yourself what you actually are. She'd had to remind herself more than she wanted to admit. The hospital asked me to stay. She said officially a real position. I heard. Alves looked at her. What are you going to do? Emily thought about Hale's office, about Donna on the bench outside the ambulance bay at 5:40 in the morning, about Calloway starting compressions because of how she'd said it, about the boy Marcus and his hidden bleed, and Warren Delgato in the parking lot, and all the ordinary emergencies of ordinary people that didn't make federal case files, but were in their own way the same work, the same underlying thing, the refusal to let someone die when you had the skill to. Stop it. I'm going to stay, she said. For now. Alves nodded. Good. The position isn't what I was trained for. No, but you chose it. Alves paused. There's something in that in choosing the work that nobody sees. Most people who can do what you can do don't want the room that doesn't know what it's watching. She looked at Emily with the specific particular look of someone who had spent a career in the shadow of things that couldn't be acknowledged. You did. You stayed in it. That's not weakness. That's a kind of courage that doesn't have a citation. Emily didn't answer right away. Outside the bay moved. The light shifted. She thought about all the people who had looked at her and decided what she was. The ones who'd done it from authority, from institution, from the easy comfort of a hierarchy that told them who mattered. She thought about what it had cost her to let them be wrong, and what it had cost her to stay small. And the specific night when it had all come apart. Not because she'd sought it, but because the work required it. Because someone needed to stay alive, and she was the person who knew how. That was all it had ever been. She was the person who knew how. She'd known how in a field hospital and in a trauma bay, and on a stairwell landing and on a dock over grey water at 5 in the morning. The context changed. The knowing didn't. They had tried to bury it protocol and circumstance, and a man with a clicking pen who needed her to be less so he could be more. They had tried to convince her through accumulated pressure and deliberate diminishment that what she carried was something to hide. They were wrong. That was the thing about real strength. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself or seek a room full of acknowledgement. It doesn't disappear when someone decides not to see it. It doesn't diminish because someone needs it too. It waits. It does the work. It holds the IV line and calls the code and moves through the stairwell and finds the fragment and pushes the cart down the corridor and stands on the dock at 5 in the morning reading the coordinates off a screen. It just keeps going, and eventually, not always, not on schedule, not in the way that tidy stories promise, eventually the room catches up to the truth of it. She stood. She picked up her badge from the chair arm where she'd set it, and she clipped it straight. She looked at Alves. Get some rest, she said. Alves almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. Emily walked out of the room, down the hallway to the elevator. She stood inside it, and let the doors close, and did not feel trapped. She pressed 3. The elevator descended, and when the doors opened on the 3rd floor, she walked out into the ordinary fluorescent noise of a hospital doing its irreducible work. The monitors, the charts, the call lights, the residents arguing over a scan, Terry managing the station, a patient's family in the hallway, looking lost and frightened in the way that families looked in hospitals when they needed someone to tell them the truth clearly and without flinching. Emily went to them. She told them the truth clearly. She answered their questions. She walked them to the right place. She did not drop anything. She did not stumble. She did not look at the floor. She had been the person that rooms looked through for 14 months, and she was done with the practice of making herself easy to overlook. And the work was the same work it had always been, and she was exactly where she was, and she was not hiding. That in the end was the whole of it. Not a dramatic exit or triumphant return to a classified life, or a formal ceremony with flags and citations, though the citations now existed again in the record where they belonged. Not a moment of perfect closure where every loss was repaid and every wound was even. Just a woman who knew what she was walking into a room that needed her, doing the work without apology. The ceiling that other people set was not the ceiling. It never had been.